Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Melanin podcast. It is our fourth Raymonday and it's our second episode under the theme of traditionalism. Previously, on the two-episode special, The Misinterpretations of the Melanin Child, we dived into the topic of generational trauma and how it influences our choices and affects society today. We spoke about the various mediums where trauma is transmitted, like racism, colorism, and popular culture, and how innocent individuals like you and I can be manipulated by others, carrying the chains of intense trauma, mostly rooted from slavery, to hurt other individuals around us and affect and destroy the black community and society on a whole. Today's and next week's episode, we will be discussing and looking at the people who contribute to the transmission of trauma, the younger generation and the older generation. Sit back, chillax, and enjoy the episode. The title for today's episode is The O in Tradition Stands for Oppression. Psychosocial impacts of trauma in the black community are not monitored, which is a really bad thing. If one person has had a traumatic experience, the trauma can potentially be passed on to the entire family, the generation, and by extent, the future generations to come. It is therefore very important that we understand what the concept of trauma is, what trauma have the former generations before us endured and suffered from, and what devices can we now employ to fight against existing trauma. Because the thing about it is that trauma has the power to destroy a relationship's bond and ultimately the black community on a whole. So we acknowledge that yes, trauma has been passed down through generations. We see how certain cycles are repeated, certain behaviors remain the same. Some people choose to be obstinate, what we would describe as stubborn as a mule when it comes to certain social issues. And there seems to be somewhat of a barrier between the older and the younger generations. The right terminology would be a generation gap. On the one side, you see a lot of older people frowning down at the younger generations because a lot of them have the mentality that younger people are fooled by the systems of the world and the trends of the world. And on the other side now, you see a lot of younger people ignoring and rejecting older generation mentalities because it seems as if older generation culture does not support progression and advancement. And it's like older people are fooled by the system of colonialism. I genuinely believe that the difference between generations is that the older generation is brainwashed and the younger generation is manipulated, both by the system. Now, it's obvious not every single person from both generations are slaves of oppression and the system. However, you see large percentages of both groups being heavily manipulated and brainwashed. Today, I'll be focusing on the older generation and how the trauma they have endured affects the black community today. Older generation culture is dying, and it is one of the most hilarious thing ever. Older generation culture glorifies simplicity, moralism, and conservatism. Anything that really aims to uphold traditional values, practices, morals defined by their standards and mentalities. One mentality that I've noticed a lot of older people have is that of which they have set the foundation for everything in this world to function flawlessly. So therefore, we must follow everything they see and mimic their behaviors and actions precisely how they do them. Or another one they have is they have the solutions for all problems, and their solutions are the only true effective solutions. So you should therefore submit yourselves to their way and develop unrealistic standards for yourselves. And if you fail to do those, you are therefore unsuccessful or failure by their standards. Now, obviously, not a lot of young people follow these mentalities or these ways of the older generation because really and truly it forces you into states of anxiety, and it can push you into depression, and it can also cause you to have what I like to call colonized happiness because you're not really happy. You're just following exactly what somebody else said you should follow. What certain older people don't understand is that life isn't really controlled. It's not fixed. It's not regular. It's defined by random events. You cannot have the same approach for every situation, especially approaches that are not effective. New issues will arise. People have different reactions to different situations. Sometimes people are not defying or fighting against or rebelling against the older generation. You're not even trying to test the waters. What you're actually doing is trying to develop some understanding on what issues are for themselves. Let that sit with you for like a minute. You're in the habit of driving down the same road every day of your life, and all of a sudden there are men at work. It calls for you to take a new path. Will you go around the men? Will you take a detour? You cannot have the same approach for everything in life. And the main issue with the older generation is that they pride themselves in being brainwashed. Sometimes I laugh, not haha funny, more like haha pathetic at how our systems, the systems set up by the older generation, mirror those of the colonizers and the oppressors. Like there's no room for reasoning and actual understanding. A typical example would be education. Our education system favors performance and knowledge retention over actual knowledge, and that's really sad. Historically, education was sort of a medium to control the masses during slavery. They made it seem as if knowledge was limited. They determined what exactly you learned, and you weren't really allowed to know too much information, just enough to follow their agendas. And I still think that this exists today. They tell you little things like, education sets the foundation for secure destination. But yet still our education system is absolute trash. And if you don't succeed, you're automatically a failure by societal standards. It's really strange. It's really bizarre how we have a first world education system in a third world country. You'd pay thousands of dollars to learn hundreds of concepts that you would probably never use in the real world and in the work world. So a lot of people just go on to be pretty mediocre and inefficient in society. They'd ask you to develop ideas, projects, school assessments to help develop the region. And what's funny is that regardless of how well or poorly students may perform, I feel like most times students generally come up with extremely unique ideas which actually could develop and revolutionize all West Indian societal systems. But they'd most likely mark you down and give you an average score because it's never about the actual advancement. It's never about the progress. It's always about the system. You could have $1 million idea to change the entire society, and they'd be like, you know what, society is already good how it is. Don't change anything. We'll give you a little pass for that, but just run along after that. And that's really sad. Like, your research project on mass environmental degradation by the tourism industry is good, but due to the lack of the use of similes and metaphors, we'll have to give you a COD. The sky is the limit though, just you can do better, you can do better. Or you created a module which outlines the causes of poverty and provided several new solutions to combat this issue. But you see, the thing is, your delivery in your presentation wasn't too good. I have to deduct 20 marks. I'll also remove 30 marks for the grammatical errors you made in a language your ancestors were forced to speak after they were enslaved for several centuries by the colonizers. And everybody expects social issues to just disappear. It's crazy. Just to give a little, sorry, though, just to give a little example of how horrible the education system is here. Certain studies and subjects have disciplines, they have different divisions, they have different branches. So let's just say, I'm trying to illustrate a picture in your head right now. So just imagine this subject has 4 disciplines. Each discipline is worth 25% of the final grade. So 4 times 25% would be 100%. That's the total mark, right? Let's say you have one individual, and I see this happens a lot of the time. You have one individual who's good at just one discipline. So no matter what you throw at him, he'll get full marks, 100% in that discipline, not one out of the 4 disciplines. 100% or 25% is 25% out of 100% of the total grade. So you have the student performing at 100% in this particular discipline, and they're weak in, let's say, the other disciplines. So at the end, they probably get about 40% thereabout. But the thing is, they excel, they aced that one discipline. On the other side, you have someone who is average or mediocre at all the disciplines. So they generally get the same mark in each discipline. They get a higher score. Our education system really prefers the individual who will get the average score in every single discipline rather than the one who would probably excel in that one discipline. And it's really crazy because the thing is, the one who got the average score in every discipline might not be as passionate as these disciplines as the one who got that 25% already because he was good at that one discipline. That person could have gone out and been the best person to ever run that discipline before. That person could have gone out to change the entire meaning of what that subject was. And what society really does is just praise those who perform generally good at everything, rather those who are talented, who do have the hidden abilities, who do have the capabilities to excel in one particular department. And then you go in the work world and you see everyone being so basic, everyone being so similar, and nobody's really unique. Nobody is really treating it as a passion. And when there's no passion, when there's no good energy, it's just basic. There's no advancement taking place, it just stays the same. And that is exactly what older generation culture does and supports and glorifies and romanticizes. And that's sad. Another issue with the older generation culture is they fail to acknowledge mental health, which really shows how brainwashed a lot of older people are. Like I said before, it's not every single individual part of the older generations, but it is the majority, I believe. You can't entirely blame them because the older generation came from positions where their mental health wasn't viewed as important by society and their families. We have to remember that they lived in post-colonial era. Blacks were denied basic needs and human rights during slavery already. They were abused physically, emotionally, sexually. So mental health definitely wasn't monitored, wasn't considered as important back then. And we know that that was carried into post-colonial societies. A decent, respectful individual was one who followed the oppressor's rule and neglected their own needs. It's really unfortunate that little concepts like happiness was defined by how well you followed the oppressors. If you follow their rules, you have no reason to be sad or depressed. And you see these mentalities being repeated today. Another reason I guess the older generation failed to recognize mental health is due to the fact that they suffered from many physical limitations such as poverty, which is why some older people have mentalities that younger people today do not suffer and we choose to pretend that we are suffering. Since generally most of us do not suffer as much as they did when they were our age group or our ages, they look at mental health as a myth or an excuse for us to just go on and rant. An excuse for us to be ungrateful, an excuse for us to be, how do I say this? Dramatic. I mean, you have somebody who used to walk to school 20 miles every day for 15 years. There's no way you're convincing them that your anxiety is serious. As a result, we see that the older generation, or most people from the older generations, are brainwashed by colonial systems to jeer and emotionally torment people with opposing views on certain matters from them. One of the features of the West Indian family dynamic is respect for elders and those who came before you. Now, I do believe that the concept of respect is important, inherently important. However, we must have an understanding of what exactly respect entails because some people think that if you don't do everything a certain way or you don't follow every single thing that is done by the older generation, you are therefore being disrespectful. How I see it from the older generation view is respect is basically blindly following everything the individuals older than you do without questioning it. And to me, heavy following of the older generation, or basically following their culture, is similar to following the system set up by the oppressors to destroy people in the first place. Like, allow people to develop understandings of certain things and aspects for themselves. What's wrong with that? And we see that forced culture definitely exists. Instead of educating younger people and giving them room to apply certain behaviors for themselves, certain things that is forced onto them. And if you don't follow them, you're automatically disrespectful. You're automatically a failure. You're automatically in the wrong. And we see that you have failure to solve social issues when you have these issues existing. A lot of ignorance exists as well. I mean, I don't know who needs to hear this, but Being part of the older generation does not mean you are immune to being toxic. It doesn't mean you're immune to being a human being. It doesn't mean that you're immune to being ignorant, and it doesn't mean that you're immune to being uneducated, because not every single thing you do is automatically right. Intelligence does not come with age. Let me give an example now about mental health, involving mental health. There is a difference between supporting somebody's belief and respecting them as a human being that they are. Typical example: support of people who abuse and discriminate against people with particular sexual orientations. Regardless of the decisions people choose to make, regardless of how wrong or right their choices are to you, under no circumstances should you delight in the suffering and ill treatment of others. And that's disgusting. It's like, to the older generations, you have a belief independent from mine. Yours is already not the norm, and I believe that mine is the only right way, since society and the system already told me so. Or it's just my belief, and that's okay. So, in order for me to get you to abandon your view and follow mine, I will use excessive slander and derogatory comments to emotionally and mentally destroy you until you change your mindset. That is ridiculous. You have examples. So many men have been shot and stabbed just because of their sexual orientation. You have a lot of people using slurs and comments trying to destroy them, which is really strange to me. And the thing is, some people may already be having mental illnesses like depression. Some people may already be contemplating giving their lives away. Some people may be on the verge of just breaking down, giving up. And it's like, when you use these comments against them, you're not helping the situation. You're making it worse for them. Your one comment might just be the last thing to knock them down completely without you even knowing. And that's a very crazy thing. I remember one time God said something to me, and it was like, it blew my mind. Like, it really was something I did not expect. And it's basically the devil's biggest weapon is not a sword or a gun or fire. His biggest weapon is hate and hatred, which is the opposite of love. Think about that for a second. The devil's biggest weapon is hatred. It just has me like, wow, because hatred is what's most commonly used to solve all social issues. And hatred is the reason why social issues continue to exist and have never gone away. And that's something not a lot of people understand. And that's something that older generation culture supports and romanticizes hatred as a means of solving issues and solving problems, regardless of who it may affect. I have an issue with you. I'm going to use my anger, my hatred towards you to destroy you so I can feel good about myself. And let me tell you how this really affects society even more. The younger generation sees this. And it's no secret that the younger generation is a mess already. Everybody knows that the younger generation is reckless. And now you see most younger people recklessly making social issues worse because they always take it to the extreme. Since they already have the mentalities that the system and society wants them to follow these behaviors, they take it the next level and they involve crime, they involve excessive violence, they involve manipulation, humiliation, into the abuse of certain people with different beliefs independent from them. And the older generation does nothing about it because they're comfortable with the fact that their toxic mentalities and behaviors are being practiced by the younger generation. And that's honestly one of the reasons why social issues have never gone away. The older generation beat their chest, claiming to be all able, all knowing, all powerful, but fail to put an end to all these situations. Then they blame the younger generations for these situations. The same ones that they caused, the same ones that they could have prevented but choose not to prevent, the same ones that they still can't prevent, but they'll do nothing about it because why would you do something against yourself? I mean, they're the ones creating the issues in the first place. And obviously, after kicking these individuals out of society circle, they go on and they form their own circle outside of society. And the older generation is upset. You saw them suffer. You did nothing. In fact, you did something. You neglected them. You laughed at them. You continued to abuse their rights, but you're upset because they form a circle outside of society, outside of the hatred. They're wicked for not wanting to be abused by you. I'm not saying that everyone should just kill their beliefs and just submit to the mindset that this is what is right or this is what should be practiced. I'm not saying that we should normalize everything. We should normalize everything because love is love. Everything the younger generation does is automatically a good thing. I'm not saying these things. However, you cannot use hate to solve issues and expect to reap positive benefits. You cannot manipulate and abuse somebody emotionally and expect them to come to you like, thank you so much for helping me discover my true identity. That's not how it works, yo. That's really not how it works, and that's really pathetic that people think that that is the way it should be. I think most people just don't quite understand the importance of mental health awareness and how it feels to be in, these states. As you see that depression is a very prevalent issue in the black community, and many people choose to stand against the entire belief that a lot of people suffer from depression. People believe that once you have a lot of how do I say this, financial security and expensive possessions, it automatically prevents you from being in these states. Not a lot of people know that there are many causes to mental health illnesses. Not a lot of people really know that various traditions play an important role in adding to people's mental illnesses. I mean, you have a lot of them, such as loss of purpose, forsaken aspirations, alienation, torture, ancestral trauma, intra-family abuses. You have addictions. You have intense peer pressure. You have the entire concept of people losing friends, losing loved ones, intense self-criticism, and abuse. I feel like even abuse isn't really taken seriously today. And it's really strange because a lot of people are continuing to be abused. Their rights are continuing to be violated, and nobody really looks at the situation as serious. It's slowly becoming a norm, and that's really strange. A common reaction you'll get from the older generation is probably like something around the lines of like they would say something that, okay, Janik, all of these issues and more existed when the older generation were young. And that's true, but the thing is, these issues were all swept under the rug. And we see that these issues are continuing to be repeated today, and it's become worse. It's crazy how everything is out in the open, but everyone fails to acknowledge the issues. And it's just a matter of hurt people hurting more people, and they go to hurt more people. So it's like a cycle, and it never really ends. So I feel like we definitely should use this opportunity to help save others, especially the younger generation. The older generation will pretend as if they have everything in control. Do right by us this one time and just aim to be a little more supportive when it comes to mental health problems. Okay, so we spoke about the entire tradition of using hate to combat social issues. We spoke about the entire concept of respect and how you're considered to be disrespectful if you don't follow the exact actions and behaviors of the older generation. What we'll speak about now is the delusion of false happiness from the older generation. Okay, so it's no surprise that a lot of older people, they set extremely high standards for themselves, their families, children, and the younger generation in general. And we see a lot of younger people doing that for themselves as well. Even when it seems impossible, you see people have all types of standards for themselves. Now, no matter how unrealistic they may be, a lot of the time you're expected to actually meet the standards, and if you don't meet the standards, you will not be considered successful by society, which is crazy. And we did speak about this issue when I spoke about education earlier. Another institution I feel like you have a lot of unrealistic standards and you have a lot of false happiness is in relationships, and specifically romantic relationships. So like, let's just bring up the topic of marriage. I think marriage is good. The way the older generation presents it to us though is really bad. Like they make it seem as if it's an accomplishment. The way they make it seem is it's like the quality of that marriage is defined by the age you get married, the fact that you get married, and probably the status of who you're marrying. Like it's not really about the character, but maybe their job or what they have or what they've done to give themselves a name or whatever. And I feel like that's really bad because that's not what it's about. That's not what it should be about. And also, like it defies the entire purpose of getting together. Like they make it seem as if it's a contract and not a unification of souls. And you see that in the younger generation too. A lot of relationships today are based on status and possession and not really love, which makes relationships really pointless. Like we're a toxic couple. Instead of healing and getting help, we'll get married. No, you need to get help. And that's something I think like the older generation really glorifies. They don't really take time to teach healthy, effective relationships. It's just doing it for the whole point of doing it. And that's why a lot of people are discouraged from doing certain things like that, like getting married and stuff like that. A lot of people think that if they were to get married, it would automatically make them in control of their partner, which is very strange, very confusing to me how you think that you have the power to control a human being because you are married. I was actually watching a series, I think, 2 nights ago, and I guess it was kind of parodying life for housewives in like the 60s and the 50s in the US. And you basically had this one woman who I guess she was saying that her husband didn't like appreciate her enough. He only appreciated the beers and the alcohol and stuff like that. And she was talking about how he still loves her and she still loves him. Despite the fact that he neglects all her needs and everything. He still loves her, and despite the fact that he doesn't come home to her, the love is there. And it's like I feel like the older generation culture definitely romanticizes forced culture. Like it doesn't allow you to know your worth. You just do things for the fact of doing them without really understanding your identity, without really understanding the purpose for it. And that's probably why a lot of relationships today are so empty, and it's just useless and most of them just end. Although most older gens and older generation culture in general seem to have the best interests of the youth at heart, because of forced culture and the way they expect to just push everything onto everyone, and then develop this unhealthy extreme standards that we must abide by, a lot of people will turn away from these certain practices because they are very undesirable. I'm not trying to be one of those people, who have the type mentality as, rules are for fools or whatever. But it's like as much as you have rules, as much as there's discipline, try to have more conversations. Try to actually develop relationships. Try to actually develop solutions for issues. Try not to always go that extra mile to just punish and correct and just, you know, because it's really annoying. And you always have these group of people in the older generation who just ruin it for everybody. The older generation will preach about this being wrong, this being right, and then you have this one or two people in the older generation who just do the complete opposite. They do whatever they want, and that's who the youth may choose to follow. Because I mean, yes, you may be preaching that okay, this is right, this is wrong, but because you're doing it so harsh, you're making it so difficult to follow these practices, follow these ideals, follow these mentalities. Whereas you have somebody who's saying, well, this is right, this is wrong, this can be right, this can be wrong. it's an option to follow these rules. I mean, as much as it may be bad in reality, because they're making it seem so passive, because they're not as aggressive, that's where you may see a lot of more people following. That's why a lot of people are not following older generation culture. That's why I'm so excited that older generation culture is dying. As much as the younger generation is so crazy and so reckless, at least finally now, the older generation can finally see that they do not have the answers for everything. They are not as powerful and influential as they seem, and maybe they'll see that most, if not all, the world's problems were caused by their actions. According to the old people, sheer power face shots. So-called reckless younger generation, they're just mirroring what the older generation is doing. And that's the reality there. My final statement will be this: extreme younger generation movements were influenced or indirectly caused by extreme older generation movements. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into this episode of my podcast. I will see you all next week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Adios.